public transportation in big city and small town. In a random sample of 250 residents from a big city, 210 prefer to take public transportation to work due to heavy traffic and inconvenient parking. On the other hand, 52 out of 162 residents from a small town prefer to take public transportation to work. My question is, do you have evidence to reject that the proportions of using public transportation between big city and small town are identical? So what is identical? Identical means they are equal. Do we use an equal in alternative? Of course not. So when you see the word identical, identical means equal. So we put that equal in the null hypothesis, H0, right? So your H0 is P1 is equals to P2, and then your HA, I will take the opposite, P1 not equal to P2. So since you use a not equal, then this is a two-sided test, right? So that means have p-value on the left side, have p-value on the right side of the bell curve. Okay, so we have the setup, city and town. So for city, we have x1 over n1 to 10 out of 250, town x2 over n2, 50 out of 162, and then the pole proportion is you add the x and then you add the n. All right, and then the next step is you go to where? Your calculator, right? And then what key do you press? You press the stat key. Where is the stat key? The stat key is on the left hand side of the left arrow, STAT. You hit the stat key and then you go to test and then you choose 2 prop z test. That means 2 proportion z test. So once you click 2 proportion z test, they will show you a menu. If you completed a problem before, the numbers from the last problems are there. And then in this problem, so right over here, so you have x1 to 10, n1 to 50, and then x2 50, n2 162. And then what inequality sign do we use? We use a not equal because the sign in HA determines the p-value, the left side, right side, and two side, right? So since this is a two side, then we have half p-value on the left and half p-value on the right. And then once everything is ready, you hit the calculate. So when you hit calculate, that will bring you to this menu. So you have a z and a p-value. Let's write this down. So for the z, so that z is equals to p1 hat minus p2 hat, and then divided by pole proportion p hat 1 minus p hat, and then times 1 over n1 plus 1 over n2. So we don't need to plug in numbers to calculate because the calculator reported the p to me. So that is 10.918. So we have that equals to 10.918. I usually keep 3 decimal places. And then the p-value is the p-value 9.665. No. Do you see that there is a e minus 28 at the end? So this is a scientific notation. So the p-value in scientific notation, that is a 9.66 times 10 to the negative 28. 9.66 times 10 to the negative 28. When you do homeworks online, I believe that you can just put 0 because this is so small that is approximately equals to 0. So if you hit draw, do you see that the second screenshot, the 2 proportion t-test? So he calculate, you get a z and a p-value, right? If you click draw, they will give you a bell curve and then they will show you what the z is, so which is right over here. They will show you the p-value and the z. So since this is a two-sided test, we have half p-value on the left and half p-value on the right, and then the z is where the cutoff is. So since you have two sides, so that means negative 10 on the left and positive 10 on the right. Okay, so since p-value is so small, what do you do? For a small p-value, then since this p-value is less than alpha, what is my alpha? Oh, I forgot to give you alpha, right? So here, let me just add this. This one alpha is 1%. I will just add that back right now. So the significance level is 1%. Okay, so significance level is 1%. So since this is less than 1% alpha, then what do you say? You reject the null hypothesis and say the alternative hypothesis is true. So we reject H0, so that means HA is true. then what is true? The proportion of using public transportation between city and small town are different. So let's write this down. The proportion of taking public transportation between city and town are different. Between city and town are different or not identical. And then this is the end of the two proportion Z test. This is the end of the hypothesis test. Now, let me give you one more thing. When you do homework online, they will ask you to do this. So what is this? This one is P1 hat minus P2 hat. So this is called the sampling distribution. So what that means is the sampling distribution follows normal distribution. They will just ask you to write a capital N, and then with mean P1 minus P2 that is always equals to 0 because you assume they are equal in the null hypothesis. And then do you see the square root term? So for the square root term, the P hat, you can grab numbers straight from here. The P hat, so the P hat, let's use 3 decimal places, 0.631, and then 1 minus that, right? And then you have 1 divided by n1. So the n1, what's n1? n1 is equals to 250, and then n2 is equals to 162. This is the denominator of the Z formula. Okay. Now, the hypothesis test is done. Let's move on to the confidence interval. So we have 1% alpha, right? So since alpha is 1%, we have 1% alpha. Then we are conducting a 99% confidence interval. Okay, the formula is P1 hat minus P2 hat, and then plus or minus Z alpha divided by 2, and then the square root. This is not the square root you see in the previous problem. This is P1 hat, 1 minus itself, divided by n1 plus P1 hat, P2 hat, 1 minus P2 hat. Some textbook call this a Q2, divided by n2. You don't need to plug in any number. You go to stat and then you go to test. So this time you're selecting a 2 proportion Z interval, 2 prop Z int. Okay. You click enter, the numbers will roll over from the hypothesis test, and then make sure the C level, which is the confidence level, is right. So this is a 99%, and then you hit calculate. So you have 0.42042, and then 0.64229. So since this is a proportion, it is reasonable to put the decimal to percentage, which is multiply 100, and then you add the percentage symbol. So this is approximately 42%, and then this is approximately 64%. Okay, and then what is the biggest purpose of using confidence interval? The biggest purpose is, do you see that we just reject H naught using the p-value? So we can reject H naught again using the confidence interval. So that means I'm trying to verify the conclusion I made is correct. So this is called verify. Let's recall the H naught. So your H naught is P1 equals to P2, right? So that means P1 minus P2 is equals to 0. So two numbers are the same. So let's say 15 equals to 15. Then 15 minus 15 is equals to 0. Okay? And then is this 0 between the two percentage? Between 0.4 and 0.6? The answer is no. Why do we say that? Because the purpose of using confidence interval is you are trying to say that the truth is between those two numbers, and you claim that 0 is the truth. Is 0 between them? No, right? So that means the statement is not true. So that means H naught is not true. So you reject H naught. See, we just reject H naught using the confidence interval. So there are two ways to reject H naught. The first way is using a p-value, which is what everybody does. And then the second way is using a confidence interval. All right. And then one other thing that you can do, let me just cut this. This is from the previous problem. One other thing that you can do is you can explain the confidence interval. So what's the language? Explain. So let me just type this up for you. Explain the confidence interval. Explain. So explain the confidence interval, CI. How do you explain? The correct language is we are 99% confident that the difference proportion of taking public transportation between city and town falls between 42% and 64%. 64%. Okay, the difference between town and city falls between 62 and 64, and then you can go one more step deeper. So you use P1 minus P2, right? You use P1 hat minus P2 hat, and then P1 is city, and then P2 is town. So it turns out that 42 and 64, this is positive number, right? So that means city has a bigger proportion, town has a smaller proportion. That's how you get a positive. So let's say city has a 70% and then town is 40%. So when you subtract them, that is the only way to get a greater than 0. So that once again, that tells me city is greater than town. Okay, so that is the end of this problem. If you think this is helpful, give me a like, share, and subscribe, and I will catch you all in the next one. Signing out.